Let's get right to it. It's time for your reality check. Just days before a student-led march to protest gun violence is set to take place in Washington, D.C. and throughout the country, another tragic school shooting has taken place. A shooting at Great Mills High School in Maryland left one student dead and 2 others injured. Students at Great Mills High School participated Wednesday in the nation's walkout to demand stricter gun laws in the wake of the February 14th mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, which left 17 people dead. But apparently it wasn't enough. I've got news for you, America. If we don't do something drastic, school shootings aren't going to stop. They're going to become the norm. Yes, indeed, America, it is true. Now, let's take a listen to Sheriff Tim Cameron talk about what took place in St. Mary's County at Great Mills High School.
When the shooting took place, our school resource officer, who was stationed inside the school, was alerted to the event and the shots being fired. He pursued the shooter, engaged the shooter, during which that engagement he fired a round at the shooter. Simultaneously, the shooter fired a round as well.
Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty on this one, let me give you a little more facts of exactly what took place, so sort of a timeline. So a 17-year-old male student opened fire using a handgun around 8 p.m. in the hallways at Great Mills High School, striking a 16-year-old female student and a 14-year-old male, according to St. Mary's Sheriff Tim Cameron. Now, this is seems to be a girlfriend-boyfriend dispute. The school's armed resource officer, and identified by the police as St. Mary's County Deputy Sheriff Blaine Gaskill, exchanged fire with the shooter. Cameron said Gaskill was not injured and the shooter was killed at that particular moment. 3 students were transported to a local hospital. The shooter, whom police have identified as Austin Wyatt Rollins, died hours later. Now, the female student still remains in the ICU on life support, and we'll continue to follow her condition. Now, here's the thing. Now, let me say this, because there's been a lot of misinformation on both sides, on many sides, as President Trump would say. So number one, this shooter did not have an AR-15. There was a lot of reports right after it happened that this shooter had AR-15. That is not true. Number two, this shooter was apprehended by a school resource officer, an armed police officer that is trained to work inside the school building to help build a stronger community between students and the police department. I have no problem with school resource officers. Most sensible people have no problems with school resource officers because they serve a purpose. My entire K-12 education, I remember having a school resource officer present. I can even remember the school resource officer's name. I remember my high school resource officer was Officer Livingston. I'll never forget Officer Livingston. And then in elementary school, we had Deputy A. These are names that I remember because what they did was they did it right in Broward County, is they made sure the school resource officers became part of the school and worked with the students so that we could break down the stigma that exists between police departments and communities of color, and for that being said, for all communities, for that matter. So now this gets us to where we seem to be. 2 sides. On one side, you have the National Rifle Association and their supporters who want no regulations at all. They want America to be the wild, wild west where everybody and their mother can have access to a gun. They also believe that the best way to make our students safe is to arm teachers. That's one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, you have groups from the left who are saying we need reforms immediately. We need to ban the AR-15, we need to fix the national background check system, and we need to raise the age on those that are allowed to buy rifles. Like, you shouldn't be 18 and be allowed to buy a rifle. Now, I sit squarely in the middle on some of these matters. So there's been a lot of misinformation about where Richard Fowler sits. We did an Instagram video about it. Some crazy conservative radio host he got on Twitter and basically said that my position is going to kill more students, which we at the Fowler Show responded to swiftly. It woke me out of my bed, America. I was not a happy camper. But let's get down to it. Here's the solution, because I think people are missing the forest for the trees here. Yes, we need to harden schools. Right now, schools are soft targets. Over and over and over again, we have seen schools be soft targets for carnage to reign, both in Parkland, Florida. We could start from Columbine, almost 20 some odd years ago, to Parkland, Florida, and Stoneman Douglas High School today, right? You have Sandy Hook. You have, and I can go on and on and on and talk about all these soft targets. So yes, we've got to harden targets. There's no question about it. So what does that mean? Well, I think we could start by making sure we have more school resource officers that are properly trained. Now, let me be very clear. School resource officers should not, all capitals, be utilized for discipline. They should be utilized to be in the schools to break down the stigma that exists between community and police departments. They should not be there to help with discipline. They shouldn't be there handcuffing students. They should be there as a resource to schools, which is in their title, School Resource Officer, period. But they should be there, taking part, teaching about drug abuse, teaching about drug violence, teaching about all these things, being a resource to students that are in trouble. Like in trouble as in like they're being abused. Okay, I'll put that to the side. Can we do more to can we do more to protect our schools? Of course. Do we want to, I'm not sure if putting, military guys in front of our school buildings are exactly the solution. But if people want to do that, that's fine. My only requirement is that should be in front of the school gate, so it doesn't interrupt the teaching and learning that has to take place in the school building. Which brings us to arming teachers. I am adamantly, and most sensible people, including a majority of teachers, are adamantly against the ideal of arming teachers. For a couple reasons. Reason number one, teachers are there to teach students. They're there to educate them. They're there to bring the joy of learning to the classroom. They're there to teach you how to read, how to write, how to multiply, how to divide, how to add, how to understand Pythagorean's theorem. They are not there to be security guard and chief. They're not. And so the ideal of putting a gun, or the ideal of breaking the solemn connection between teachers and students by putting a weapon that is used to kill people into a classroom is a non-starter. Number one, I think being a teacher is a very stressful job, period. And they're underpaid, period. I mean, talk about it. I mean, West Virginia had a 9-day teacher strike. There's Oklahoma's getting ready to have another teacher strike. So now you're going to add another responsibility for teachers that they have to now make sure their classrooms are safe with a gun. Not to mention the fact that African Americans and Hispanic students are disproportionately disciplined compared to their white counterparts. So then add a gun, a weapon of a killing weapon to that equation, and say that it's not going to scare the living daylights out of brown and black students that their white teacher is now armed, because it is. Moving on. Putting a gun in the classroom also gives access for students to have access to that gun. How about if it's not locked up correctly? God forbid something happens to the teacher, or God forbid a student finds out that the gun's in the classroom. You are opening up a Pandora's box that you just cannot close by this stupid ideal of arming teachers. Here's what you can arm teachers in schools with. How about you arm teachers with more resources? How about you arm schools with more counselors and more social workers, and maybe a school nurse for that matter? How about you arm schools with more computer labs? How about you arm schools with folks that could meet the social and emotional needs of every student? Sometimes we forget that our students come to school with more than just learning on their mind. Sometimes our kids come to school understanding that their mother got beat last night by their father. Sometimes kids come to school after being assaulted or raped. These are things that happen on a daily basis in our school buildings, and by introducing a weapon into these school buildings, you make matters uniquely worse, and you increase tensions in a place that should be safe, welcoming, and thriving. Now let's go on to this AR-15 issue. There's some out there that believe we should ban the AR-15. I'm in that camp, but I also understand that we cannot get that done in the current climate that we live in many state legislatures and here in Washington. So let's do this. Let's work on making it harder for bad people and young people to get access to this weapon of war. I'm not speaking out of my ass when it comes to the AR-15. I've actually held an AR-15. And after holding the AR-15, it is very clear to me that an 18-year-old should not be able to walk into a store and buy this weapon of war. Period. But America, we've got work to do. And as the good book says, the children shall lead us. And that is exactly what's happening. Now it is in our best interest to listen.